Hi there, I'm Rex King. Welcome back to another episode of From the Archive, and today I'm talking about The Unforgiven. So The Unforgiven was directed by John Huston and written by Ben Maddow, and is based off a novel written by Alan Lee May. The novel and the subsequent original story were supposed to focus on the racial tension and prejudice between Native Americans and Western townsfolk. And for the most part, the film does follow that, but as many people will know, Huston had to make several cuts and several compromises with the production group, Hill, Hetchet, and Lancaster, to basically get this film out because they wanted a more commercially accessible Western, and they felt the road that he was taking the film wasn't going to be that way. So they compromised, and well, what you get is the finished product here. We'll get more into that, but I do want to talk a little bit about the production story, as the production was not easy, especially for Audrey Hepburn, who got kicked from her horse, causing her to not only injure her back, but miscarry as she was pregnant at the time. However, the film was still released on April 6, 1960, but it was not successful. It only made $3.2 million on a budget of $5 million, and critics panned it, stating that though it had some elements of a unique Western, it still followed the generic path of a generic one. What do I think? Well, let's talk about it. So The Unforgiven follows the Zachary family. You have Ben Zachary, played by Burt Lancaster, Rachel Zachary, played by Audrey Hepburn, Cash Zachary, played by Audie Murphy. The second youngest brother, I do not remember the character's name, played by Doug McClure, and Ma Zachary, played by Lillian Gish. They have run a successful cattle business and have a decent relationship with everyone in town until an old enemy returns to spread rumors about Rachel Zachary's true origins. And before I get further in, I do want to put a spoiler warning, as I can't talk about this movie without talking about the reveal. Heck, most descriptions just talk about the reveal, but if you want to go in this film completely blind, stop here and come back after you have watched the movie. If you're still here, well, he's basically telling everyone that Rachel Zachary is actually of Kiowa Native American descent. And this causes tension between the Zacharys and the other townsfolk. And to make matters even worse, the local Kiowa tribe shows up wanting Rachel back. So, yeah, this film had a lot going for it. It tries to deal with the racial prejudice that occurred between Native American tribespeople and Western townsfolk, even when the Native Americans were raised by more traditional townsfolk and were more around them, they still weren't accepted at all. And I really like that. There's another character in this film called Johnny Portugal, who's very much hinted to be like Native American descent, and he faces a lot of the same prejudice that Rachel faces later in the film. And I would have really liked to see those two kind of talk about that, or like that come up after the reveal in the film, after she finally finds out who she is as a person. It could have made for an interesting story. However, Johnny Portugal gets like forgotten about at the halfway point of the film, and the film decides to go a much more stereotypical Western route with a final fight with the Kiowa Native Americans. For some reason. Like, I do not understand why the Kiowas and the Zacharys are fighting. At first, I get why there's tension between the two, because the first time the Kiowas show up, most of the Zachary household refuses to believe that Rachel actually is of Kiowa descent, as their mother and father have told them that she's of descent of somebody who died as a result of the Kiowa tribesmen. And they don't want to give her up because of that reason. After they find out, though, wouldn't the conversation change? Instead, as soon as the Kiowa show back up, Ben's response to this is to start shooting. It doesn't make any sense, especially considering Ben Zachary is shown to be the smartest person in this film most of the time. He doesn't judge people by their descent. He doesn't care about what people's bloodlines are. He just wants to live his life his way and doesn't care what other people think. And that could have, again, been interesting, because it could have had more dynamic between Ben and the Kiowas. But instead, because he's worried he'll lose Rachel, it turns into a shootout, which really didn't need to happen at all. And it really feels weird and hollow because of that. To make matters worse, the characters are, for the most part, stereotypical Western archetypes. They don't try to develop these characters for the most part. Again, the most interesting character here is Johnny Portugal because he feels like an outsider, and I wish we had more with him, especially towards the end of the film. But as it stands, the only other interesting character is Ben Zachary, and he's basically your generic Western hero, who has to get the girl at the end, even though said girl was raised to be his sister. Let that sink in for a bit. It really kind of took a while for me too. It really bothered me as well. And then you have like the performances, and Burt Lancaster is fine. I've never really liked him as a performer, but I usually love Audrey Hepburn, and in this film she's miscast. She really doesn't do a whole lot, and she really is almost phoning in her performance at times. I really don't understand the direction they were going with for her, because it just doesn't work. I really felt like they should have cast anyone else. I mean, I love Audrey Hepburn, but she just wasn't the right fit for this character. Honestly, the best performer is Audie Murphy as Cash, and I really liked him in the film. I felt that he managed to sell this character really well. Then you bring on to the visuals, which are honestly the best part of the movie, because visually this film is quite striking, and you could tell that this was John Huston still trying to do his best with what little he had, and he made a visually great film. Just not a good film story-wise or character-wise. The music is just your standard Western stuff, and isn't anything to write home about. As it stands, The Unforgiven had a lot of potential, and you can clearly see that in the film, but just comes up short. So your enjoyment of this film is going to come down to, do you enjoy other Westerns? Now, for me, I do. I grew up watching Westerns with my dad on Sunday mornings, and it was just something we did. And I grew accustomed to them, so I have a taste for Westerns. And this film is not a bad Western. In fact, it has a little bit more to it than most other Westerns. I just wish it had a little bit more. And as it stands, the film is just fine. It is fine. It's probably one of the least impactful films that John Huston ever directed. But if you like Westerns and are looking for a Western that has a little bit more bite to it, I think you'll like this one alright. If you don't like Westerns, I got nothing here for you, because this film is not for you. Anyway, next time we take a look at probably one of the most important films that I have ever looked at on this show. I'm talking about the original Godzilla. See you then.